Hello and welcome to Two Drink Maximum, the show over two drinks and nothing else. I'm your co-host Chase.
I'm your other host Shane.
We have a very exciting show today, as always. We've got another wonderful guest with us today. Summer is kicking off, so it's nice and warm here in California for us. But let me get to our guest. For over 4 decades, international best-selling author Joe R. Lansdale has earned legions of fans, coveted literary awards, and critical praise for his genre-defining career. Lansdale's more than 50 novels, novellas, and over 400 short stories encompass mysteries, westerns, horror, thrillers, pulp crime, and science fiction. He's also written graphic novels for DC, Marvel, Dark Horse, IDW, and others. His new novel, Sugar on the Bone, a Hap and Leonard novel, comes out July 18th and is already getting incredible reviews. Thank you for joining us, Joe, and we got to ask, what are we drinking and why did you pick it?
Well, I'm glad to be here and thank you for having me. And I'm drinking iced tea unsweet.
Ah,
Nice.
That's my go-to.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I mean, we're
welcome.
Texas boys. You're from Texas as well. So when we got your drink order, we had to read it twice because my brain filled in sweet tea and I just assumed it was sweet tea. Are you, have you had sweet tea? Are you a fan of it? Or is it, that's such a Texas thing, sweet tea, right?
Yeah, it is a Texas thing, and I don't drink it. But when I was growing up, I did. I mean, what they used to do is they got a big jar like this, and they would put it about half filled with sugar. Take a bag, pour it in there,
of
and
course.
then they would put hot tea in there, and then you would then add ice, and you would have sweet iced tea. Well, I think at some point as I grew older, I just realized, this stuff's killing me. That's a lot of sugar. And so even when I would go to a restaurant for a long time, I couldn't hardly get unsweet tea. I really had to say, hey, I want the tea without the sugar.
That's right.
That's how they already had it made. So, I will use a little sweetener sometimes in it if tea is, tastes like tree bark, which sometimes it does. Or sometimes they'll have instant tea, which I despise. Most of the time, the tea's pretty good. It's just that I avoid the sugar. I don't need it as I've gotten older. And when I gotten older, it was about 30 when I decided I didn't need it. And I damn sure don't need it now.
Yeah, I do. I think that sweet tea does have a shelf life. Like because we are from Texas, we moved to LA.
Yeah.
Now when I go back, if you go to a restaurant, you don't specify unsweet tea, you'll get sweet tea and you're just like, oh my God, this is so sweet.
much.
I can't handle it. Yeah.
That's funny. When I was visit California or something, I would say unsweet tea. They say, that's all we have. Oh, so I had to quit saying that. And the first time I did it, they brought me a sweetened tea. And I thought, that didn't work.
Yeah, still didn't get what I was looking for.
Well, it's certainly a welcome refreshment here on these days as they heat up. So let's all take a sip.
Yeah, cheers, everybody.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Well, so Joe, I mean, thank you again so much for coming on the show. We are really excited to have you. I mean, as Chase kind of mentioned, you've got a new novel coming out called Sugar on the Bones, and it is the 13th Hap and Leonard novel that you've written. I mean, it's not out yet. It comes out July 18th, but it's already getting heaped on with praise from the LA Times and Publishers Weekly. I think a lot of people are familiar with your name, and probably because of the Hap and Leonard series. But I was interested to learn that when you started writing Hap and Leonard, you had no idea that this was going to be, kind of an ongoing story that you were telling. So when you wrote that first story of that first novel, you really had no clue that these were going to become such enduring characters that, were going to be such a big part of your career.
No, I thought it was one and done. And later on, though, when I tried to write it was about 3 or 4 years later when I was writing a new novel from a new publisher, which was Mysterious Press at that time, part of Warner. I wrote a novel and I wasn't loving it. And I to my editor, he wasn't loving it either. So I said, you know what? Let me pull this aside, because in the back of my head, all those years later, I could still hear Hap's voice talking to me, trying to tell me a story. And I go, I'm through with you. But when I sat down, I wrote a new novel in 4 months, very, very quickly.
Wow.
With New York Times notable book, got a great, great large review by Daniel Woodrell and all of that. And all of a sudden I realized that, I've not only got 2 books about these guys, I think I have 3. And then it turned out, of course, over the years, I've had 13, although I've written other things in between their adventures. So I'm working on the 14th one right now.
Wow, that's incredible.
That's amazing.
So it was the second one or the third one that it dawned on you, like, okay, I've got a lot to say with these characters. I'm going to turn this into a series.
It was the second one, but by the time I did a third one, I realized, okay, I'm not just doing 1, 2, 3. This is a series. And it's funny, when I was younger and I was starting out, I wanted to have an ongoing series. And then I lost interest in that. I want to have something that was related to the private detective type of story,
Hmm.
although these stories are, uh, they have elements of that, but they have elements of a lot of other things. And then I gave up on that, and I ended up having it by accident. Maybe deep down in the wells of my little East Texas brain, I
Hmm.
actually knew I was going to do it.
Yeah. I mean, when you read any one of the books, it's very obvious why the characters have endured for as long as they have, because they're just great characters. They play so well against each other, and they just bump up against these incredible other supporting characters that you
Hmm.
have. But,
Yeah.
obviously, it seems like you enjoy writing these characters for yourself. When you write them, how do you kind of keep Hap and Leonard fresh for
Hmm.
you, right? To kind of keep going? What's that thing that keeps you going? Okay, I got novel 14. I got the next short
Yeah,
story.
how do you stretch those characters so far?
Well, I take breaks between them a lot of times. I wrote the first one. I had about a 3 4 year break, and then I wrote three or four back to back, and then I took a break and wrote another novel back to back. Then I took a break and wrote The Bottoms, which became an Edgar winner,
Mm.
and then I moved to another publisher. And because all those books were with Mysterious Press, they didn't want to publish anymore anyway because that wasn't their books. So I worked with Knopf writing other books, and then Mysterious Press went out of business. They were bought, and so that would have been another big gap between them. So I had had plenty of time to sort of refill the well with Hap and
Mm.
Leonard, and then I wrote a couple for Knopf and Vintage, and then I moved to Little Brown Mulholland, and I wrote three non related books to them, standalones. And then I wrote four of them in a row. Then I wrote three without them. And then now I've got one out and I'm doing another. But what I decided a long time ago is that to keep them fresh, I had to write them when I wanted to, because that's pretty much how I do everything anyway.
Mm.
Uh, I write like everybody I know is dead. I'm not writing for anybody else. I'm writing for me. When I get through, no, of course, I hope people like it. It's not,
Yeah.
it's not that I'm non-commercial in that sense. It's just I can't write with the idea that what do people want?
Hmm.
Because I'm not very good at that. I remember Dean Koontz once told me that this is how you do this, and this is how, and he was right. he
Hmm.
knew he knew what needed to be done to reach this very, very large audience consistently, and I only knew what was to be done to reach the audience of one,
Hmm.
which was me. And part of that's selfish, I guess, but also I just don't think I can write honestly without writing for myself. And
Yeah.
the Leonard books have a tone that I can pick back up on. They've changed over the years. They've had, I think that's because people change, and I wanted
Hmm.
them to change, and their adventures have changed somewhat. But I've also tried to explore the mysteries. I've tried to explore action adventure. I've tried to explore all of the little uh, alleyways that mystery and crime have, and that's been fun too. Is like in this one, I'm gonna in Element of Surprise, I tried to do a momentum novel where
Mm.
everything is just racing and going, and that was different for me. And so, that's what keeps it alive. And the fact is, I don't age them when I don't write about them, and
Mm.
so they're younger than me. So, which I always say, Hap is better looking and younger, but I'm smarter, but unfortunately, I'm older.
Well, it makes all that hard work makes for some really, really wonderful stories. You mentioned earlier your motto of "Write like everybody you know is dead." Could you elaborate on that a little bit and how that affects all of your writing?
Yeah, I didn't do it when I first started out, and my work sucked too, and I didn't have the enthusiasm for it. After a little while, I thought, I'm not having fun. This is not why I became a writer. I want to be someone who sells books. I want to make money, but that's not why I really became a writer. That has to be part of it, or I can't keep doing it. But in the '70s, when I was first trying to write stories, and I was selling a few too, but I just didn't feel like I was doing very well at that. And about 1983, I went full time in 1981. I had enough sales I could do that. But in 1983, I said, screw it. I'm just going to do what I want to do. And at first, that was disastrous. And then all of a sudden, it caught on. And
Mm.
then that's what they were expecting. And sometimes they expected the same thing, and I didn't always deliver the same thing because once again I was writing for me. So I worked in a variety of genres. I blended genres. I didn't consciously do it. The whole idea of somebody taking a Western and a horror story and putting them together is not blending genres. Blending is much more natural than that. One is sort of like you've chopped up a salad, and then what I try to do is put it in a blender, and make it really completely mixed. I from time to time I write something that is more genre, more static genre than other times, because I may be in the mood for that. I sometimes feel nostalgic for certain things, and I do that. Other times I do a little experimental prose. I've written for literary magazines. I've written for popular magazines. I've written for anthologies. I've written so many stories and articles and things like that because I wanted to do them. And I've certainly done some things where people said with a request, but I always try to not pick anything to do unless I want to do it. And I try to find the heart of it. If you can find the beating heart of something, you can get involved with it. You can do a good job. If you can't, then it's just little turds in the row. It's not the same. There's a magic that you can take the same words, but there's a magic that's inexplicable in how they're arranged and how the energy of a particular writer or an attitude of a particular writer can come through the prose. And I really don't know the answer to that, but if you read Hemingway, you go, oh, hell, that's good. You read F. Scott Fitzgerald, you go, oh, this boy knows what he's doing. Or Flannery O'Connor, or, there's so many people, and they're using the same alphabet, but they're not using the alphabet the same way.
Right. It's their own kind of style. I mean, it's, as we do a lot of prep and research for our show as well. I mean, it's been kind of delightful seeing other interviewers and critics, especially, trying to box you in. It's like, he's a horror writer. He's he does Westerns, and people just give up because your writing is so prolific and it's so critically acclaimed that eventually people just started calling your work Lansdalean, and it's this own genre now, right? Where it's this kind of writing style. I mean, how does that feel to be like the kind of creator of your own genre of writing? How did that, when you found out about that, how did that affect you?
Well, it feels good, but you can't let it feel too good, because it makes you a horse's ass, for one thing, but it also makes you someone who starts copying yourself, and you get away from what what makes you. But I can tell you there are a lot of people copying me, or at least trying to. And I'm not saying that's all bad. Some really great writers have done that, but they found their own voice through my influence. I did the same. I found, I stole from every good writer I could and tried to put it in that blender I was telling you about. And my early stuff was just mocking other people, which is why I knew I can't do this. There's already Raymond Chandler and Ray Bradbury and Flannery O'Connor, and I need to find where Joe is, And I started listening to the people that talked around me, and some of them were very much like Flannery O'Connor, very much like Raymond Chandler. Smart asses is a Texas thing, especially East Texas. If we didn't have smart ass, we wouldn't have any conversation.
Indeed.
So I think I borrowed from that. I borrowed from my background, being born in the 50s and in the South, and then 51 in the South, and going through the 50s and the 60s gave me a different perspective, and parents that were older when I was born. My father was born in 1909, my mother 1914. So they were like grandparents when I was born. Even their language was different. We don't realize how subtle our language changes, And so my language is somewhere caught with them and the 50s and the 60s and the present. And I think that helps give me a slightly different voice. I didn't realize that. And I think the rhythm of the Old Testament, though I'm an atheist, you had so much of that when I was growing up. You catch that kind of rhythm of voice because you're always hearing those preachers and they're dragging out something and they're, emphasizing this or whatever. And I think it sinks into you no matter what your particular beliefs are, be they religious, agnostic, or like me, atheist. You pick up on those rhythms, and so many East Texans have those rhythms. Though I think in recent years, those rhythms have begun to change because people have begun to change. They've come from different areas. They've been influenced more by television and films and the internet, because it's not just like we're going to go to the movies Friday, that it's always there for people. and books have also blended more. And I like to think and truly believe that I was one of those people that early on began to do that, not out of any clever marketing, because it's really the worst marketing choice you could make at that time, but because I didn't know how to write anything that was mine without doing that. But I know that I've influenced writers. A lot of them talk about it, many of them doing extremely well. And a number of them, I feel like they're kind of like sons or nephews or daughters or nieces, you know. And I'm happy for that. And in some cases, I just, you know, excited people enough that they said, I want to do this. You know, as one lady was telling me, she said that her mom said, you know, if he can do that in East Texas, so can you. And May Cobbs, who I'm talking about, her mom. And I thought, yeah, you're absolutely right. And she has her own thing, she does it, but at least just the fact that I was doing it. Because when I was growing up, you know, if I said, they said, what do you do? I'm a writer. What, bulls? Oh, not rodeo, man.
Yes, no. That would be the first instinct there in Texas.
I don't ride bulls, I sling bull. So,
perfect.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's like very much like, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie or if you've heard of the movie Clerks. It's a small indie film directed by Kevin Smith. Kevin Smith, the director, has said like thousands of people have come up to him and said, hey, I saw Clerks and I thought, well, if that's a movie, I can do this, right? So there's got to be something about that. It's got to feel good that your writing, you know, has inspired other people to write. It looks deceptively easy, but it isn't, you know.
Yeah, well, it's partly that, you know, as you see something, say, well, somebody can do that, I can do it. But I think sometimes the reason you feel that way is the enthusiasm and the excitement it gives you, you know. I didn't have any interest in writing screenplays growing up, but I read an interview with John Sayles once, and it was so exciting to me because I read his fiction. You know, I read his novels and short stories. I started, and I'd seen films that he had written the screenplays for, like The Howling, for example, or Piranha, or Alligator, what have you.
All great.
Then I looked up his other Return of the Secaucus 7. I went, wow, you know, that's cool. And so I started watching all of his films, and I began to write screenplays, and I began to sell screenplays, although I'd never seen a screenplay. I just sort of made it up.
It worked, right? You just figure out the format and stuff later, right?
What I did is I knew that there was a fade in and a fade out, although that's not always necessary. And I knew they did cut from one scene to another, though I didn't know that that was changing, where you don't put cut to so much anymore. You just change the scene. And so many of those things I just guessed at because I would hear them in other movies or read them in books. And so the first screenplay I wrote, optioned 11 times, sold it for a lot of money, and they never made it.
Well, that certainly happens sometimes.
I did it for Ridley Scott like that too.
Oh, wow.
They had The Big Blow. David Lynch, I think, had it for 3 years. Ridley picked it up, and his companies had it, I bet, going on 20 years. And they optioned it for about 10 years, I think. And then I wrote a screenplay for them that they had. Not only the book did the option, they had the screenplay. And then at some point, they just bought the whole project out, and then it never got made, you know, so those things.
Yeah. Well, you are one of the elusive working writers in the world. There are a lot of aspiring writers and people that work real hard, but you have managed to make a career out of it. So what do you contribute to that success?
Desperation, you know. I think too is that I wouldn't really train for much else. You know, I've tried to be an anthropologist and archaeologist. I went to school for that, but I never finished. And I love all those things. I still study them, but I realized I don't think I really want to do this today. You have to go out and dig, and it might be hot, bugs, and I had done some, and I enjoyed it, but I thought, I don't know. And hanging out in the museum sounds okay, but you know, that's kind of limited. And I never wanted to really be anything else but a writer. When I was 4 years old, I knew that's what I wanted to be. Wow. I didn't think of it as a career, but I read comic books and I wanted to write them and draw them. I didn't think of it as a career till I was older because I didn't know what a career was. You know, I just knew I had a passion for stories. And so it wasn't really a big decision because I already knew I wanted to do it. And when I was 11, I read Edgar Rice Burroughs. I knew I had to do it, because that really excited me at that age, especially. And then, of course, you know, you go on to read other writers, and you go on to read what school I had, what university and college, as I read a lot of the classic writers, and of course went on to read them more on my own. And I was always a voracious reader. I mean, I can put a book away pretty quick.
Yeah, that seems to be a very common theme with successful and critically acclaimed authors is that they're voracious readers, right? You got to be reading stuff so that you're taking it in, and not just to compare styles.
Yeah, it's like food or like your fuel. You put those words inside, and your body starts rearranging them, or your mind starts rearranging them, and trying to go, well, what about that? And this person did that. What if they had done this? And I think when you read something really, really good, it excites you and it challenges you. And when you read something really, really bad, it doesn't excite you, but it does challenge you, because you can do better, or think you can. Because sometimes you can't. And there are some writers I think that a lot of critics hate, that they're bestsellers all the time. They've got a big readership. They have a passionate readership. And I think, well, they got something I don't have, So I never looked down my nose at that, because there's something going on there where they have a connection with other readers, while I'm just trying to connect with me. That may be the problem. My interests are much more quirky. But that said, I've had a very successful career. So I
mean, so much of your work has been optioned and been turned into screenplays. I wanted to kind of touch back on that. I mean, as we say in Texas, your work has been adapted so many times. It ain't your first rodeo, right? So when you had the Hap and Leonard TV show, which was awesome. It was on 3 seasons on Sundance, and it's now on AMC Plus. You've had so many things adapted into different movies that at this kind of point in your career, what is that adaptation process like for you, when it's like I feel like you absolutely know the right time to step in and say, hey, to the filmmaking team, this probably would be better if we did this, versus, the idea of learning to kind of lean back and go, this is not something I want to push my chips in on. What's that process like for you now?
Yeah. How do you know?
You don't always get to choose, man. Sometimes when you option something, they're going to do what they want. Like with the Hap and Leonard series, I was a co-executive producer, so I could say whatever I wanted, and they would do whatever they wanted.
Right? Yeah.
But at least I got my say, and that's the way I am. I want my say if I'm in that role. Like when they did Cold in July, it was kind of like an honorary producer rate, and I didn't really have any say and didn't ask for any, unless they asked me personally,
Right.
But with the TV series, I felt like, look, I didn't want to be, I should have been executive producer in my mind, but I was co-executive, and I don't want to do that if I don't have some say. You get to do what you want. It was Jim Mickle's films or TV series, whatever. And Nick D'Amici was writing most of them. And I think that because I signed on the dotted line and I took their money, I think I made a deal. Sometimes you make a deal with the devil. I didn't. I made a deal with some really good guys that knew what they were doing and respected my work. I didn't always like their choices, and I thought sometimes that this book choice was far better, but I couldn't complain because they did a really good job. And sometimes I thought, yeah, that's better than what I had. So sometimes it's the other way around. I think when you get into the second and the third season, which I also thought was really good, I'm not as big a fan of writers' rooms as some are. I'm in the Writers Guild, and that was one of the things that people wanted, with larger writers' rooms. I want smaller writer rooms. In fact, I like one person to be the person. Maybe they can oversee some other writers if they want, but I really don't care that much about everybody's opinion. What bothers me is when you get in a writer's room, people are getting paid to come up with something, so they'll come up with any shit they can think of,
Sure. Right.
So that later when something comes along and say, you see that scene with the dog shit on that rock? That was me. I did that.
Brilliant. Yeah. Brilliant.
And it's the way they get more work, by having that contribution. The best adaptations to me are the ones where they try to stick close to the book or story. And that's not always possible, by the way. I mean, some stories and books just are not easily adaptable, or short stories too short to be absolutely literal. But it just seems to me that the first thing is they plan to give their vision. I don't really give a shit about your vision. I want my vision on there because it's my story. But I'll sign that contract, because that's what keeps you doing it. You keep getting money and you keep going, and stories and books, if they're successful, lead people to pick up the actual work and read it. you know,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what I'm after.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and there's in the filmmaking world, right? There are obviously some physical absolutes that you always, the sun setting, we can't do this, or we don't have the
Yes.
budget to pull this off.
Yeah.
But
It's
I just
raining.
can't, or it's raining, or it's whatever, right? It's
Yeah.
like we just don't have the, but I just can't imagine anybody standing on a set and saying, no, Hap and Leonard wouldn't say this, or, trying to be a more expert on your characters than you are. It's like, guys,
Yeah,
come on.
yeah, there is a little of that, but I love those guys. I mean, I always called Jim Mickle my nephew because when I first dealt with him was through Cold in July, and at that point in time, Jim was practically a kid, and he had a little monster movie about, I think, what were they, zombie rats or something? I can't remember, but it was good. And I saw it and I said, this kid's got it. And the script was good, and Nick D'Amici did that, and Nick starred in it. And I said, these guys have got something. So I stuck to them, and I wished I wish we could do something else together. But Jim's got a good career going on now. He's doing so many different things, and he's good at all of them. And so I almost feel like a proud uncle because he learned working for me in a way.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's incredible. Well, continuing down the line of adaptations and you marching to the beat of your own drum as far as stories, I want to read a log line for something that was adapted for you or from your work, and then go on. So, when residents of their nursing homes start dying of dubious causes, an aged Elvis and an African-American senior who claims to be President John F. Kennedy discover the perpetrator is an Egyptian mummy with murderous intentions. Is of course the logline for Bubba Hotep, an incredible cult classic horror film that you, I believe, wrote the original short story for.
Right.
And my question is, how did you ever arrive at that being a story worth pursuing?
That's a good question. I was always a big Elvis Presley fan. And when I was a kid, that's when he first, came out and was on the airwaves. And I didn't realize that when I lived in Gladewater, I lived just outside of Gladewater, Texas, as 4 or 5 years old. I don't know exactly what it was, but I was listening to Elvis and I didn't realize he was actually singing live in the radio station just down the road from us. So I was hearing a lot of that on that radio station, which later became a place to produce music, And so my daughter did 2 songs there. She's a professional songwriter and performer.
Oh, very cool.
But the thing is that I didn't realize that. And then later I realized that found out that my brother, who was 17 years older than me, like he's in his late 80s right now, he lived in Memphis and met his wife there, who graduated high school with Elvis. So she introduced him to Elvis. So at least he had met him and recognized him. Wow. And he once went to a school for radio announcers because you used to have a license for that. You couldn't just decide to be a radio announcer then. Yeah. And he was talking to the guy sitting by him, and they were like talking about all their frustrations, and it was Johnny Cash. And then later, my daughter actually recorded in the Cash cabin with John Carter Cash, and she was like one of his opening acts and things like that. So it's funny how those things were connected. But because of my interest in Elvis Presley and the fact that John F. Kennedy had been assassinated when I was young, probably about 11 years old, those things naturally blend. And my mother had been in a severe car accident where she had to have around the clock care. So she was in a nursing home where I would go visit. My brother and I would go visit. And I just picked up a lot of stuff there. Some of the dialogue in the story come right from dialogue I heard from people, and so I think all those things were there. And when I was asked to write a story about it for a book called The King is Dead, that came up, and I remember writing it pretty fast. It was a pretty long story, but I was writing it pretty fast, and I was influenced, I think, by the Beat Poets a little bit when I was writing it.
Gotcha.
It has that kind of rhythm to it,
Sure.
And it has a little bit of experimental kind of prose in it. And when I sent it off, I thought, oh shit, that's crazy story. Yeah, they're gonna think this guy, man, what is he doing having a career as a writer? And so I was going to withdraw it. We did it this way back then through mail. There was no email. Before I could actually write my letter and send it to withdraw the story, I got an acceptance, and they thought this is probably the best thing in the book so far. So
That's amazing.
yeah, well, yeah, that's right.
Well,
that's what I meant to do.
That's what I love about Bubba Hotep, right? Is that it's like, if it was just the one crazy thing, like Elvis in a retirement home, you'd be like, whatever. But like, there's so many crazy elements. It forms this perfect story of like, oh my God, this is wild, and it all works. And the movie also holds up, I mean, so well.
Wonderful movie. It's the best adaptation of my work of all time, because Coscarelli really respected that story and treated it just like the story I wrote. There had to be some changes because there wasn't enough money. And in the story, instead of the big bug, there was a bunch of shadows that followed it around. Well, didn't have the CGI and all the stuff to make that work, which I think was a good thing. And so he made it into that one beetle. And I thought, you know what? That works better on screen. I like that.
Right.
And there were other little things like that, but mostly, the dialogue's right out of the story. And at one point they wanted me to narrate it, but I didn't think that was a good idea. There is a version of me out there narrating it, I think, for kind of a promotional stuff, and it's on the DVD, and that's that gives you some idea. But when he got Bruce Campbell, that I knew that was a good sign. And then when Ossie Davis came on, I liked to, just lost it because I'm such a fan. I love his stuff since I was a kid. He was civil rights stuff and things that I admired so much. And so I remember meeting him and being just kind of stunned, And so that was great. And I loved being on the set for a large part of it. And Bruce and I became friends and still are. And I just loved how good he is and how actually underrated he is.
Oh, I absolutely agree. Bruce Campbell's an amazing actor.
I wouldn't have been surprised if he got an Oscar for that film, because he was just incredible. He had that character and he nailed it.
Yeah, it's like a much more pensive version of Elvis than I think you're used to seeing, and it works. I mean, I remember when we got introduced to the film, we were in high school, and it was like the film kind of had this mythic status because it was like only playing at film festivals, and you couldn't see it or whatever. And then finally, when it hit DVD, one of our friends bought it, and it was like, oh, we gotta watch it. And it was like one of the rare things where a movie had been built up so much, and then it meets your expectations. You're like, yes, this is so great,
Well, I'll be honest with you. I didn't have high expectations, even though I loved Don and loved his work. I just thought, I told him, I actually tried to talk him out of doing it. I said, this thing is filmable, Don. And he went, no, I think it is. And I said, I hate to take your money, but I will. But and so he optioned it, I think, a couple of years in a row before he actually got it made. And Bruce used to say, it didn't open, it escaped.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. But now it's considered, it's gone beyond a cult status, and it's just become like a major movie. You see references to it everywhere, and sometimes you'll see things where they refer to somebody as a Bubba Hotep. And I was also writing it in such a way that it was about aging and about personal worth and about how certain things that you think are going to make you happy completely don't necessarily do it. When you get older, it's not really all those things that you thought it was, or it's actually about having family, it's about having friends, it's about having a career that was satisfying, but that wasn't everything. And I think that's what gives that film bite. And it's funny because I was in my 40s, I guess, when that came out, but the feelings for that, as I grow older, I realized that I had tapped into that, probably being around all of that so much. And now I'm much more aware of it because, sometimes I think I see Bubba on the horizon,
It is a very, very poignant take on aging and regrets and just living a life that you want to be lived. So congratulations.
Don did so good. And I think he did very good in my Incident on and Off a Mountain Road as well, which he did for Showtime. But
yeah,
he's just an amazing filmmaker. Another guy I wished I would have had a chance to work with more. Still, would hope that, but Don's not in a hurry.
Right. Yeah. When he came to you with Bubba Hotep, did he already have the screenplay written, and
Oh,
is that how he pitched you, or did he ask you to write the screenplay?
he didn't come to me for Bubba Hotep. He did ask, but he didn't come to me for Bubba Hotep. He came to me for the drive-in. And the drive-in at that time was under option, if I remember correctly. He actually just called me one day on the phone. I didn't know him. He said, "This is Don Coscarelli, and I'm a director." I said, "Well, I know your work. I mean, I Phantasm, etc."
Yeah.
I said, "Yeah, I'm a big fan, man." He said, "Well, can I come visit with you a few days?" I said, "Well, yeah." So he just showed up at the house and stayed with me, I don't know, 2 or 3 days. And we talked over, different projects and things like that. And after he got home, I think if I remember right, he said he went into a bookstore and then he read about Bubba Hotep, and he thought, "I think this is what I'm looking for."
Yeah.
And once Don latches on to something, he's like the proverbial pit bull,
Mm.
more like a shark. He did ask me to write the screenplay, but I just wasn't enough money. I actually had sold screenplays, but I wasn't in the guild. I also wrote for Batman the Animated Series, and that wasn't part of the WGA and stuff like that. But nonetheless, I said, "No, Don, I just can't do that. I mean, I can write something else in the same time and make more money, and I got to feed my family." And I just didn't think it could be done properly. And then he did it. And I had a few suggestions I offered, which he didn't go for, but Bruce offered the same suggestions, and all of a sudden they got a lot smarter, and he did go for them. So, it just turned out I wasn't the star,
Yeah.
That's all right. It ended up working out just fine.
Yeah, Bruce is a wise guy. He knows stuff,
He knows what he's doing, right? Yeah, he's been around the block, right?
He has been around the block.
Speaking of suggestions, I'm going to suggest we take a quick break here because I'm looking at 3 empty glasses of iced tea. So we need to take a quick break, and we're going to make a refill, and we'll be right back. Chase, I don't know about you, but it does feel like ever since COVID hit, we spend so much time in our homes, and our homes have kind of become our office, and it's been this kind of weird blend of professional and home. I find that occasionally it is difficult to become creative in the house. Sometimes you got to get out and you got to find a different space to kind of let that creativity fly. And we are excited to share with our listeners that if you are in the LA area, we have the solution for you. We are proudly sponsored by The Muse Rooms, which is a creative co-working space that is here. They have a Hollywood location and they have a Burbank location, 2 convenient locations for you, that is ready to serve all of your creative space needs. If you want to rent space for a day to work on that screenplay, or if you need to rent a conference room for a big meeting that you have with a team that doesn't meet regularly, The Muse Rooms has got you covered. It's a great space. It's a great owner. It's a great vibe too. It's just a really cool, you'll get points with the youngsters.
Oh, yeah.
For being cool for renting out.
It's the hip spot to be, indeed.
It definitely is. So give the Muse Rooms a check if you for all of your creative co-working space needs at the Muse MUSE rooms.com. And now let's move on to part 2 of the show. And we've got 3 full glasses of unsweetened iced tea here, so we're back with Joe R. Lansdale. Joe, one of the things you mentioned earlier, and we certainly were, are going to ask about, is that you worked on Batman the Animated Series, and Chase and we have known each other for a very long time. To say that we are fans of that series would be a huge understatement. It would be a cardinal sin if we didn't get a chance to talk to you about that show.
Quit talking right now if you weren't fans of this.
But when I read interviews with anybody that was involved with the show, it's always spoken about in such like hushed, hollow tones that there was just something in the water that you guys were all drinking. That show just came out to be perfect. And that show is so regarded still to this day as one of the best Batman, film pieces of entertainment. And we strongly agree with that. How did you kind of get involved with that? I know you were a Batman fan before, but how did you get involved with that show?
Well, I was always a Batman fan, and one of my friends, Bob Wayne, worked for DC Comics. And once I went to visit him and he gave me the tour, the DC comic tour, and he said, "Look, let me show you something." So we went into a spot where they had like a big screen, and he played the opening to Batman the Animated Series, just that and everybody, kind of showing their cape.
Yeah.
The music comes in and the blimp, and it's great.
Yeah. He said, "What do you think about that?" I said, "Man, that is fantastic." And so sometime later, quite a bit of time later, I think, the show, I think, was already coming on, and I got a call. I think it was Mike Reeves that called me, or maybe it was Bruce Timm. I don't remember. Might have been Deanie. I just don't remember. But they called and said, "Would you like to try to do a script for this series?" And I thought, "Wow, does a dog like to lick its ass?" And so
an emphatic yes.
Yeah, an emphatic yes. And I can't lick my ass, so I'll do this.
Yeah.
Which reminds me of a joke. I'm going to stick it in real quick.
Yes.
Two guys walk along, see a dog laying in the road, and he's licking his balls. And the guy says, "Ooh, I wish I could do that." And that guy goes, his friend goes, "Ooh, that dog bites you?" You have to think about it a minute.
Yeah.
But
that's good.
When I got called for it, I said, "Yeah, I'm very interested." And what they did is they had a general idea of what they wanted the story to be, and they would send that. And back then, I think they may have sent it by FedEx or mail or whatever. But when I got it, I called them and said, "Yeah, let me give it a shot." And so I wrote Perchance to Dream, and they loved it. And of course, they had a basic good story already. And that was so much fun. And I ended up doing Read My Lips, which is really more my favorite of all of them. I like that noir feel.
Yeah.
I thought the dialogue in it was fun. And it had a lot of me in it when I wrote it. And I did one other showdown, which was Jonah Hex, and it was framed by Batman, really.
Yeah.
Jonah Hex story. And then later on, they went into Batman and Robin Adventures, I think is what it was called. I wrote one of those, and I wrote a Superman based on an idea they had, and they didn't love my script, but they loved some of the ideas. So I got credit for working on that script, on that episode, which I should have, of course. But the other guy had a better script, and I think it was a better representation of that story than the one I gave him. So I was happy just to have been involved with that.
Did you realize early on how special the show was, or was it,
Yes.
it wasn't until they started coming out that people were freaking out, like how good the show
Well,
is?
I recognized it when I first saw it. And I just thought, this is, to me, it's the best Batman of all. And I'm including all the films, because I think that it captures that Batman that when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, but it's not as silly. And of course, it didn't seem silly to me when I was a kid, but it also captures that sort of tone that changed when detective comics begin to be more realistic oriented and trying to learn from Marvel, which I never loved the Marvel characters as much, but they were doing better work in the 60s. They had more interesting characters, more character depth. So I think that Batman was the result of all that stuff, plus being influenced by the Keaton film, which was also about that time too. So I think that all of those things coming together, when I was watching it, I thought, this is everything I want from Batman, everything I wished it could be. And I think another thing that helped me get the job wasn't just that that Bob Wayne had shown it to me. I had written 2 Batman short stories for 2 anthologies, and in fact, I'm real proud of those. Subway Jack would be the one I like the best, because it's kind of a Jack the Ripper story, in a way. And people still talk about it, and I'm always surprised that they remember it. And then I did another one. I did a Joker story, and later on, I ended up writing a Batman novel called Captured by the Engines, Engines, and it was Native Americans who turned into cars, because instead of like using animals, they were using a more modern representation.
Okay.
And then I did a Batman, I guess children's or young adult book too. And there were several of those, and I did one of those. So I was kind of Batmaned in a way. Yeah.
That's the dream, though. I mean, it's huge Batman fans. You've been on some hallowed ground, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when I heard,
you don't really dip into IP all that much, right? Is dipping into writing IP something that's kind of a rare choice for you? Is it something that you choose to do sparingly if it's IP that you enjoy, like Batman or Jonah Hex? Is that kind of your guiding principle?
Well, it has to be something that I love. I finished a Tarzan novel because Burroughs had written one, started one, never finished it. I think it seemed like he had 80 pages typed up. I don't remember. And but anyway, Dark Horse asked me if I wanted to finish the book, and they were going to publish a book, but they were going to publish it in 4 pulp magazines, and then they were going to do it as a solid book. And I remember when they first called me, I said, man, you need to get, they said, you know who would like to do this? And I said, Philip Jose Farmer would be perfect. I said, man, he knows this kind of stuff, and Tarzan's his big. I said, me too. I love it. So they said, well, we were actually thinking about you. And I said, well, fuck Philip Jose Farmer. So I ended up doing it, and I loved it because I got to write Tarzan. And then later I wrote a Tarzan novella, and I wrote a John Carter of Mars short story. And so I wrote an introduction recently to one of the Tarzan novels, Tarzan at the Earth's Core. And I just find that was so satisfying because as a kid, that affected me. Well, Batman, and then Edgar Rice Burroughs, those things really just stood me on my head. I also wrote a Lone Ranger comic for Topps with Tim Truman doing the art, which was fantastic. And it was called Two Gun Mojo. And we later did 2 other, sets of comics. But that one, I think, and it really changed the way they were doing Jonah Hex for a long time, and it's still considered one of the ones that had the most impact. And it was great fun to do, and I did a Jonah Hex short animated with Thomas Jane as Jonah Hex. And it was like 12 minutes. And when it came out, a member said, this is a better movie than the movie. And it's 12 minutes.
I mean,
it's like hell and high water. I saw a review said the best Joe Lansdale story that he didn't write.
I gotta ask, with all these amazing things that you've worked on, all this different variety of things, is there anything that you've wanted to work on that you haven't gotten the opportunity yet?
I don't think so. I mean, there might be something. I got asked to do some things that I was interested in doing, but I didn't feel the mojo, so to speak, at that time, or I was working on something else. I was doing a novel or a screenplay or what have you, and I would sometimes I would take off when the kids were young, and we would all go to Europe or something and spend some time traveling. And I usually wrote when I was doing that though too, but not as much because I write every day, but I usually just write 3 hours a day. That's been my way of doing it for, I don't know, 35, 40 years probably. And it works for me because I get diminishing returns after about 3 hours, so to me, writing's not that hard. It doesn't mean that sometimes the project isn't hard, but going in to write and doing it is not. George Martin always says that he likes having written. He likes having done, and I like doing it, and I like having written both. To me, it makes my day better. It's like morning sex. Now everything's good.
It is nice having all those words on the page. We also hear tell that you're an exploratory writer, meaning that you don't really work with beats and like planning things out beforehand. At least with Hap and Leonard, from what I understand.
Exploratory. I haven't heard that term before, but that's a good one. No, I don't do that. When I collaborate, I don't collaborate much. But when I do collaborate, sometimes that's necessary to have the beats because you're both riding off in different directions. But it doesn't work like that for me. I used to try to do that. When I first started, I had all these maps and shit. When I got through with it, I said, I'm no longer interested. I've already told that story. I just don't care anymore, And I started finding out that I did better by just getting up and writing. And part of this was learning to tap into the subconscious. And once I was able to do that, it does the work without me knowing it. So when I get up in the morning, I just go, and usually as soon as I turn it on and put my fingers on it, I'm already going. And then I'll write within the context of about 3 hours. And, if I'm truthful, I might write only an hour or 2. I get 3 to 5 pages every day, just about. Once in a while, I'll have a bad day, but 3 to 5 pages every day. And if I get more than that, that's wonderful. But if I set a goal for 3 to 5 pages a day, I'm a hero every day. But if I set some unusual, I'm going to write an entire chapter today and I'm going to work from daylight till dark. Well, I know I'm not going to do that. So I don't tell myself that because I'd be a liar. Some people are different. I mean, Dean Koontz once told me that he starts slow and builds and he'll be there 12 to 14 hours a day. I don't want to do that. That's no fun. I got other stuff to do. I mean, I have a family and I felt like, I wanted to have another part of my life. I wanted to enjoy time reading. I wanted to enjoy time watching films or TV has advanced since back then. Used to,
Yes.
yeah, you were waiting for like an episode of The Incredible Hulk.
Oh, great
Yeah.
show.
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible to learn that you kind of write, like, it's like you're building the bridge in front of you as you're standing on it already. Because I think so many people, myself included, would just assume that to write a successful mystery or crime novel, you got to kind of reverse engineer it, right? The end, and then kind of work backwards.
Well, they may be right.
Well, I mean, but I can tell you, your stories are great, and so the fact that you can do it the opposite way, it just speaks to your kind of inherent talent that you're able to connect all these things as you go.
Yeah, I like doing that, and that way I feel at least my conscious mind feels excited and surprised, because the conscious mind hides it from me until it reveals it as I write. Then I have a totally different feeling about it because I'm excited. And my conscious mind is not as clever as my unconscious mind, but it shapes things a little better. So I always try to start in the morning. I get up, take the pit bull out, and he wakes me up in the morning. I get up, I take the pit bull out, and then I feed him. And then I have a breakfast. Usually it's oatmeal and coffee. And I go up and I start writing. And that's when the subconscious comes out. You're still in a semi-dream state, but you're not so sleepy that you don't know your ass from your elbow. You're at least kind of like, okay, this is the machine. You turn it on here, and then I start writing, and then gradually the world starts to creep in. You feel that magic is starting to sort of dissolve, and that's when I quit. But I always try to leave just a little magic there, or a little gas in the tank. You might use that term. And when I'm done, it seems like it's sort of like sourdough starter. I just keep a little bit going.
Right, just a little bit there. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of know what my next sentence is, maybe, or what generally. And then I just go to sleep that night, and I get up the next morning, and I try not to consciously think about it during the day. That doesn't mean that out now and again you might think, oh, I could put that in, but that's different. It's not like you're sitting down and making a big plot or anything like that. Something will happen on occasion where somebody will say something, it's like hotter than two rats fucking in a wool sock. You go, I got that one.
I gotta remember that one.
I'm going to use that one.
Yeah, exactly.
Things like that, because those add to it, but that's not like plotting it. That's a different thing, and I'll remember a lot of my stuff is my dad's dialogue and how he used to talk. I just stole a lot of that from him, but it's having the right place to use it, and just letting that story carry you instead of you trying to carry it. Because if you try to carry it, that's heavy, and it just wears you out, and you get nervous and upset about it. But if you say, well, I'm just going to let it happen, I'm going to have fun, I'm willing to make mistakes, it may not be perfect, but it's going to be as good as I can make it. And then there's another element that isn't true of all writers, and I think I'm lucky in this way. I'm a storyteller by nature. And so you can get away with a lot of things that maybe you shouldn't get away with, but a storyteller has a voice and an attitude and a style. Because when, like Mark Twain, you would read his work, he'd be telling you the story, and before you know it, you realize he's gone off on another story. And I didn't even notice it.
Yeah.
And just when I do notice it, he's back to the other one. How does he do that, And I once saw the guy that used to portray Twain. I can't think of his name at the moment. Really
Val Kilmer did that one act.
He did a
one-man show, whatever.
That was noted for it, and great actor. I can't even think of his name right now. But I saw him do it on stage once, and he had this one thing where he was telling this kind of banal story, and you're sitting there going, well. And then the guy says, yeah, and this dog, he had a dog, and its name was, what was that dog's name? Can't remember. What was it? And he'd do that, and he'd go on, and you'd go, what the hell, man? and I'd read a lot of Twain, but I'd never come across that. And he would go on and starts telling the story, and this banal, and all of a sudden he goes, Jasper. That's the dog, Jasper. And that was the whole thing. That was the whole and then you start to realize the banal story isn't that banal. It starts to become something more. Well, that's storytelling. That's not the same thing as plotting. It's not even the same thing as just writing. It's storytelling. And a good storyteller is, and even the third step is the storyteller that has a certain stylistic flair, a certain stylistic touch. If you read Ray Bradbury, you don't think that's Bob. you think that's Ray Bradbury, right?
Right.
And if you read Raymond Chandler, that's Raymond Chandler, and Flannery O'Connor. I mean, whoever the writers that seem to have survived are normally stylists and or storytellers. There are some writers that are terrific, but they're not natural storytellers. They're plotters. You think of them like with a ruler and everything, and they're drawing it all out, and it all comes together. A lot of, I guess, what you call cozies are like that to me. And I enjoy some of them, but it's still, I can feel like it's clockwork fiction, where everything, making.
Yeah.
This would never happen. The guy wouldn't do that, or she wouldn't do that. That's designed purely to make that plot work. And I've tried a few of those just out of curiosity, and I'm not very good at it. So I tip my hat to those that do it. But it's a different way of approaching a story. And so, I love to experiment and do different things. But the thing I do best is just naturally tell a story.
Right.
Voice.
You mentioned. Oh,
go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Go for it. I'm going to take it in a different direction for a second.
Well, what I was going to ask was, do you have somebody when you're working on stuff? Do you have kind of somebody like in your family, maybe your wife, that's kind of your first editor and critic that's kind of keeping you on track, or does nobody really get a chance to read your work until it's done?
Oh, I don't care what they think. I write it. My wife early on, when we started, she would go, she said, I don't think his name should be Bob. I go, that's it. I'm done.
That's the only note. No more.
All right. You got your shot.
But if I had a grammar question, she could answer it. Or a spelling question. But the thing is that sometimes I wanted to use not official grammar. I wanted to tell the story as I felt the tonality of it would be with that character. And so that wasn't always a good thing to ask either. But sometimes when they were finished, she would read them, but by then I'd already turned them in. I didn't really need any cheerleader but my wife, who always was my cheerleader. She has Alzheimer's now, and in fact,
sorry to hear that.
Yeah, we have down the road. We had to put her into to a memory unit where I can see her when I want, but it's just obviously it's just not the same.
Right.
She was always my cheerleader in the sense that she just always encouraged me, but she never officially took things apart. She might read it after it came out in a book. That was a different thing. But I really, and I hope it's not ego, but I just don't really care about other people's opinion. When it's done, I care about the editor's opinion because he's going to be responsible for me getting paid. And but then again, I never care about an editor's opinion enough to make every change they ask. In fact, I sometimes have never made none of them. I go, no, I'm not doing any of them. Then sometimes an editor will come along and they'll catch something that you missed. That's the only kind of editorial stuff I like. If you got your own story and you're trying to do that, write your own goddamn book. If you're trying to make my story better, I'm listening. And if they come up with advice that makes it better, I'll do it. If they don't, I won't.
That's a really great thing to know, that you've connected with your wife over her reading your stories, and just how you continue to hold up your own personal motto of writing what you want to write. It says here you've written more than 400 short stories, and you mentioned Ray Bradbury, who's another amazing short story author. What draws you to short stories? What do you like about writing those?
Well, when that says 400 short stories, I've got to right on argue with you, but it's actually 400 short pieces.
Gotcha.
But the largest percentage of those are short stories, and it may well be well over 400. I've been saying 400 for 10 years. And but the thing is that I've written a lot. And what makes me write short stories is that I never intended to be a short story writer. I wanted to be just a novelist. And when I started writing, there were a lot of magazines and things then. And I said, well, if I maybe can sell a short story to these magazines and I can learn how to write better, shorter, and I can get it finished. And then I got into this and I said, oh my God, this stuff is magic. Short stories are the thing. I still believe that. I think they're far better than novels. And especially in things like horror and fantasy and science fiction, I think generally short stories do better. So I think I was drawn to them by trying to study more and more about what made short stories work. And I started reading people like Ray Bradbury. And I thought, my God, Charles Beaumont, who nobody knows now, but he used to write for the Twilight Zone. He died at 38 of Alzheimer's, or something very similar to it. And then, like Richard Matheson. And I was also influenced by TV shows like the Twilight Zone, the Alfred Hitchcock Presents Thriller. thriller, which was in the early 60s. A lot of people don't remember it, but they adapted Robert Bloch, Robert E. Howard. They did his Pigeons from Hell, which was the scariest thing on TV until the 70s, when effects became more available to people and they could do more on TV. But I was affected by all those in films, the Roger Corman films, the Universal films, every book I could get my hands on, and not just horror. I didn't just read horror. I actually, when I was a kid, read all sorts of stuff, but I thought, excuse me, I thought I was going to grow up to be a science fiction writer. And I thought that's all I'll ever do is write science fiction novels. And when I started reading science fiction short stories to break into those markets, I discovered this new world that led me to, Bradbury talked about all these other literary writers. And I started reading them with a little bit of a snobbish approach. I'm a genre writer. Right. And I thought, oh, these guys can write. Yeah. And I began to realize that a lot of the stuff I liked was poorly written. That conceptually, the engines that drove them were more fascinating to me. And there were certainly great writers. I mean, the ones I named, Bradbury and Beaumont and Matheson, they were stylists. They were great writers. You got Theodore Sturgeon and, a long list. And some were more what I think of as idea writers, like Philip K. Dick was a mixed bag. Sometimes he was good, sometimes he was awful. But he didn't always write well, but when he wrote well, he wrote really well, but his ideas were intriguing. And Jose Farmer, who's my favorite science fiction writer, could just be dreadful at times because he had to write so fast to make a living. But when he was good, there was nobody like Philip Jose Farmer. He was a genius, Yeah. Definitely. And so, you got all these different influences.
Well, it sounds to me, you are certainly proof that a story does not have to be long for it to be effective. But is it with short stories and novellas and the stuff that you write is one of the kind of excitement points for you that you can kind of quickly move on to a different thing if your mood.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
It's the fact I can only move on to another thing. I can move on to another very different thing. I'll write something that's whimsy. I'll write flash fiction. Then I'll write something very detailed. I'll write something for kind of a literary magazine. I'll write for an anthology. If they'd interest me, they'll say, we got an anthology and we're doing an anthology and it's, dicks are the theme. And so what, right.
Yeah, sure.
And I go, well, does that interest me? Well, of course it does. And then, you find all these different things, people ask you and say they ask you something simple, like write a vampire story. Well, a lot of those, I'm not against them, but that's pretty heavily trod territory. So you start thinking, well, how can I look at a vampire differently? How can I look at a mummy differently? Bubba Hotep is a mummy story.
Yeah. Make him fight Elvis. That seems to be the secret.
Yeah, that's how you do it. Yeah.
How do I look at a werewolf differently?
Yeah, exactly.
So to me, those things are my old classic things growing up, but they encourage me to think, the old term outside the box, but they encourage me to look at it through different eyes and try to find the central concept that drives vampires, werewolves, mummies. What's going on here, And so you start trying to look at it that way. Or Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, in many ways, is a werewolf story. I mean, there are a lot of things you start seeing all these different connections, and you start looking at serial killers, which are real people, but in many ways they fulfill the bills of like werewolves because they seem to change.
Right.
They can seem like the everyday guy, and then all of a sudden they're not. And so after that, you have to find the fascination point.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to find your own way into it, right? And and that's what that's what keeps it fresh for you, right?
Right. For me, yeah.
I wanted to ask you a question that I think you're in a very unique position to answer, right? Because as you mentioned earlier, you have 2 kids, and those kids have become successful writers in their own right with comics and screenplays and novels. You've also taught screenwriting and you've taught writing classes before. So you're in a very unique position to answer this question about, can good writing be taught? Is the kind of a nature versus nurture thing, right? Do you think that there is some inherent talent to being a good writer that you just got to be born with? Or do you think someone can reach your level of skill with teaching and with practice?
I can't give you an absolute answer on that, but generally I think somebody has to be born. You're not born to be a writer or an actor or anything like that, but you're born with certain genetic inclinations, and I think that sometimes if somebody is born with a curiosity, and that's great curiosity, they're going to look at life differently, and then their environment is going to help mold that. But a lot of that happens early. Now, someone else can learn to be a writer and actually learn to be a successful writer, but they may not necessarily be a great writer. Just right. And even if you're a bestseller, that doesn't determine. There's bestsellers you never heard of that were like knocking it out of the park financially 20 years ago. When you look at it, you go, "Who the hell's that?" It happens even with good writers too. But I believe that you almost have to have something. I have taught classes where I would have somebody who was not that well educated. That would be me too, actually. And they were kind of crude with but there was something there. Well, you can take somebody like that and you can shape them. I did that through reading. I'd learn, I'm a lousy writer. This person's doing really good. How do I learn to be this writer or this kind of writer? And so I think you can do that. I think you can kind of guide somebody with a kind of energy or a certain imaginative approach better than you can get somebody that knows all the grammar, knows all the spelling, but are about as imaginative as a rock.
Right.
It doesn't work that way, and I do believe that has to do with curiosity. And I believe that some of that you're born with, but I think a lot of it you're given, maybe purposely and maybe not purposely. Something that, for me, comic books are my, I think were my magic key. I think those things gave me this great opening that I wouldn't have had living in East Texas, where everything seemed gray to me until I read a comic. And then all of a sudden, color filled in and the world changed. I mean, I know that sounds dramatic, but it really felt that way. It felt like the world was, wow, there's more here than working at the foundry or, doing whatever, and and all respect to that, because I've done a lot of that. I worked every crummy job you can think of. I worked in an aluminum chair factory. I worked in rose fields. I was a farmer. My wife and I had a goat dairy. I did bouncing, here and there. And I mean, just all kinds of things to get there. But that wasn't what I was looking for a life career. And I don't think many kids, when they're growing up, think, what I want to be? I want to be a janitor. You might want to own the janitorial business and be a business person. But I think that a lot of people they have dreams, but they give up on them really quick. And it's probably too, because a lot of people, no matter, you can have a dream, but that doesn't mean you know how to do it.
Right.
I know people in writing that really wanted to write, but they're never going to do it. They don't have the talent, and they don't have the drive. Sometimes drive's more important than talent. It's showing up, because you can get better and that's what I said, is even somebody that's not great can get better, but somebody that has that spark can get better quickly, and they can actually have something original. Like I said, somebody who doesn't have that spark can be a bestseller, but it doesn't mean they're all that original. They found a previous pattern and they're following that pattern. And that pattern is popular with most readers who really aren't interested in the more imaginative things. They come home from work and they'd say, I'm constipated, I'm tired, I just want to watch something stupid. I don't want, and that's not their fault. I'm not knocking them, I get that totally.
They just want some popcorn media.
They just want some popcorn. And so I think a lot of that is successful, but popcorn passes. You finally get that through your bowels.
Right. And it's forgettable.
The other stuff stays in the head, and you remember it. It makes a mark. That's why you can see a movie when you're, 5 years old or 10 years old, and you can still remember parts of it, and maybe even more than parts of it. I was always, I got lucky. I got gifted with a really tremendous memory when I was younger. As I've grown older, it fails me a little, but I was able to read things and remember them, so I could put them on the shelf and sort of pull them out when I needed them. And I go, how did that work? And I could remember it. I used to, people would call me and go, hey, you know this story? Yeah, I know that story. And I used to quote stuff from them. And I can still do that a little. But there was a time when that was given to me. So that's what I'm trying to say. That was a cheat. I can't take any credit for that.
Right.
I just lucked out. I also had the natural ability to read fast, not speed read, but to read fast. I could look at something, I could almost read a page while somebody else was finishing the first paragraph. and I was reading every word, and that's a knack. And I still have that to a great degree, but when I was younger, even more so. So things like that you cannot take credit for, but that's what I meant by you're sometimes born with certain genetic inclinations, you know. And I will say this, and you know, in a little bit of embarrassment, I was a precocious little shit. You know?
No way.
Yeah, I was interested in everything. Batman comics made me want to be Batman. I got interested in martial arts. Turned out my father was, trained in a lot of that, and he got me started. Then I got more into official martial arts. But the other thing was Batman was not only a martial artist, he was interested in chemistry and all these things. And so I tried to learn about those. I wasn't like Batman. I wasn't smart enough, but it established a constant and continuous curiosity that I've never lost. And I thank Batman for that. Because without him, I wouldn't have a career. I wouldn't have read so many different things. I wouldn't have experienced so many different things had I not been trying to be Batman when I was a child. Here I am reading astronomy, and here I am reading about geology and history. So what it did is it gave me a more general view of a lot of different things. Maybe not an expert on any of them, and some I'm pretty good. But the thing is, the bottom line as a writer, there's all kinds of little tidbits, and you can twist them and change them, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, going out and living life in those little experiences, whether they're menial jobs or they're, just going out and talking to people, that all gets filtered into the writing, right? That's
You
that's
do
great
write what
advice.
you'll have some guys say, well, I wrote a fantasy novel. That wasn't anything about me. Yeah, it reads like it. And then sometimes you'll find somebody that's able to address something in their own life that's not as obvious on the page, but it's there. Sometimes it's not the actual experience of being a janitor, which I was a custodian, but it's the idea of doing monotonous work or trying to do something that is normally monotonous, to do it so well that you can be proud of the fact that you're doing it, and that when somebody comes in and say, man, you did a good job. Well, that may be minor, but that's still something that affects your work when you go in. I've always been inclined to do 110% instead of 50%.
Yeah.
Well, that works, and we certainly appreciate all the work you've put into all the things you've created, and we will gladly welcome you into the Church of Batman, because it sounds like it's changed your life to an incredible degree, just like Shane and myself. I also wanted to ask, speaking on things catching your eye, what are some authors that you are reading that everyone else should be reading that they may not know?
Well, I tend to lately have been reading a lot of older stuff. Joyce Carol Oates, I've been reading a lot of her short stories. I'm a mixed bag on Oates. When I love her, and when I don't love her, I go, what? Especially
all good writers challenge their readers.
Harder than me, But I've been rereading that. I've been reading a lot of nonfiction. The Secret Life of Bigfoot I read, which was interesting because it's a approach to the psychological aspect that keeps people interested in this or makes them believe it or whatever. I don't think he takes an exact position on it, but
Bigfoot's got to always be a mystery, or else there's no fun in Bigfoot.
I don't believe in Bigfoot, but I want to.
Yeah, I want him to be so real, right?
Yeah. So that's lately what I've been reading, and I've been rereading Chiefs, which Stuart Woods wrote a long time ago. It's a crime suspense novel. They actually filmed it for TV. Keith Carradine was in the film. A lot of actors at that time that weren't quite as well known, but were about to be.
Sure.
And it's a mystery sort of book. And like I say, I have books all over. I'm reading different books, but I'm in a reread period. I like right now. I've been rereading Ernest
Hemingway.
There we go. Yeah.
This is a special edition. And I've already read this several times, but this one has pictures.
There you go. Yeah. Makes Hemingway's words even shorter and more.
Yeah, that's right. That's the funny thing too about Hemingway, because a lot of his work isn't short. I mean, his sentence structure can be varied. One of my favorite stories was, I can't pronounce it, so it's on the I can't remember. It's a few pages long, but I couldn't pronounce it. I can kind of remember it, but I don't want to embarrass myself. It's another language, partly.
No shame here. No shame here.
It's just a few pages. It's almost one sentence, and it's just got a lot of commas and different things like that. You think of with him, but it reads like a snap. And if you read all of his work, you'll find that some of his sentences are very long. And he's also experimental. He'll drop commas where he might have used it earlier because he wants you to read it at a different pace.
Yeah, he's very intentional with his comma use.
Yeah, because you'll see people, I'll do similar things because I've been influenced by a lot of different writers. And so, yeah, it was a run-on sentence. No, it isn't. It's only a run-on sentence if it doesn't make sense. It makes sense, but you got to capture that rhythm. And it depends. And I can tell the difference when I'm reading someone that's doing that. But so many people are so caught up in what's supposed to be, they can't understand what might be. And they miss out. They miss out. And then there's some people just write a crummy run-on sentence too.
Right, it just goes on too long.
I mean, that's incidentally just great advice for life as far as where to assign your focus.
I wanted to ask you a question. Speaking of words that are hard to pronounce, you were talking about the title of the second Hap and Leonard novel, Mucho Mambo, and you said that Mucho Mojo, and you said that the English language can swallow everything. And I thought that was such an interesting way to kind of describe our language, but I'm certainly, not as eloquent with words as you are. I just wanted to see if you could expand what you meant with that a little bit, because I think you're right, but I can't explain it.
I think that language changes for a lot anyway. People don't think about that. But when I'm very popular in Italy, and I don't speak Italian. My daughter speaks Italian. I have to have her tell me what's going on. But one of the reasons that they like my work is because, unlike Italian, it's so much more open to different ways of expressing yourself. That doesn't mean they don't have their own magic, but it means it's just a different thing. And I think that English, and I'm no expert on all the languages, but I think we're willing to make changes is a lot of it. I think that's an American trait, not just English, not British, so to say, but American, because we're always been pioneers. We've always been, let's see what's happening out there on the frontier, you know? And
what are these rules? We don't need those.
Yeah, let's see what indigenous people we can screw over. Let's go.
Right.
But that's part of it. And then of course you had all of that curiosity about what was going on. So if you look at look at how many streets, how many counties and all are named after Native Americans. We just took their language too. And it's not just that, it's terms, we have terms that come from French and Spanish and whatever, and they're integrated to such an extent that we don't know that we're using those words. They're now Americanized to such a point. But I think what I'm really getting at is just that it's one reason I love American fiction so much is it swallows everything. It takes everything, and it's willing to look at everything. And I think that one of the things that I wanted to do was try to swallow genres and to take those genres and mold them, wad them up a little bit, put them back out there and show the creases. Let's do that. Let's put that out there. Let's don't iron them out completely. Let's show some of the creases, and let's make a literary intent in some of these stories. Like Bubba Hotep. Let's talk about death. Let's talk about age. Let's talk about disappointment. Let's talk about being the most famous people in the world, and ultimately, that's not what really means much in the end. You got to have more than that, or you got to expect that not to be enough, which will make things work better. I wrote about racism in The Bottoms, which Bill Paxton and I almost filmed. Unfortunately, Bill had an operation and didn't survive it. Right. But all of these different things like that in genre fiction. One reason a lot of people don't read it, we were talking about earlier. I mean, not genre, literary fiction. They don't read it is because it carries weight with these things they don't want to deal with. But if you can find a way to blend those things, and you can sort of hide that underneath the waves of genre fiction, and you can discuss things that aren't normally discussed in genre fiction. It's not just about how fast the momentum is and the twist that oftentimes doesn't make any sense. It's about having some kind of bottom line that people can connect with, and it's about having a good story that makes people think, okay, I'm just having a good time. I had a lot of people say, oh, that was a good read. And, and I've slaved my ass over that thing. And I've brought in all kinds of social issues and things like that. But all they remember is they had a good time. And you know what? That should be enough. but it's not.
It's never, ever enough. And you're certainly doing an amazing job to cultivate a literary melting pot of ideas and concepts and all this amazing stuff through all of your work, through all of these years. We're looking forward to all of it. We got to know what else is coming up for you soon.
Well, a film made from the thicket is coming out in later this year with Peter Dinklage and Juliette Lewis. I haven't seen it, so I don't know anything about it, but I did cash the check. And then I'm hoping it's going to be great and hoping it sells books. It's like James Cain says, they said, whoa, look at what they've done to your novels, which he got a good deal, by the way, with his novels. He said they didn't do anything. There they are. And there's that, but that's coming out. I've got Sugar on the Bones coming out. And later this year, I have a collection of Lansdale Lovecraft, stories.
Oh.
Words, they're Lovecraftian stories, and they're my stories, but I've used the Lovecraftian mythology to write them. So I think it's really a good collection. I'm fond of it.
Well, I've got a book to add to my list after hearing that.
Yeah, I've got 3 books to add to my list after that. That's going to be exciting. Well, it looks like I'm starting to stare at 3 empty glasses here. So as we kind of begin the wrap up process, Joe, I mean, you, as we mentioned before, I mean, it's fairly obvious your work is so prolific and you've got so much stuff out there. Where is the best place for people to kind of keep up with your adventures and to kind of catch everything that you're working on? Because I fear if there's not a central place, they might miss some of the stuff.
Well, there's www.joerlansdale, which is ran by Lou Bank, who is my webmaster. And then there's a fan page. There's a Facebook page that they gave me, but I've never been on. I have a fan page that I'm on, and Twitter or X.
Whatever they want to call it. Yeah, it's Twitter.
Everyone just calls it Twitter. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm not real sure how long I'm going to stay on it, but I've been on it a long time. So I probably will continue. And according to my daughter, I have an Instagram, I think, that she handles. So,
Yeah.
Let me see if I can find that handle.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, according to Chase, we have an Instagram too. I'm not super familiar with.
Yeah, I'm the social media maven here.
Well, it's funny, my daughter and my son have both gone into all the writing stuff, and my daughter's a singer and a songwriter and all that sort of stuff. But I never encouraged them to do that. I wanted them to do what they wanted to do, and I'm shocked that they went into that. Not the singing and songwriting. Casey was doing that as a child, but that they both. Keith has written a couple of screenplays that were filmed. The Pale Door, a weird Western, he co-wrote, and then my daughter's written all these other things. So it's amazing to me that they ended up doing all that.
So Joe, I got some easy news for you.
Yeah, I'm just saying.
Your Instagram is super simple. It's just Joe R. Lansdale.
There you
just
go.
Your name on Instagram.
Thank you, Casey.
Well, again, Joe, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to talk to us. We are so excited for all the books you've got coming out this summer, and we'd love to have you back on the show anytime you've got something that you're excited about. We'd love to kind of chat it and put it out there. So thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Absolutely. It was wonderful to chat with you. Be sure and keep up with us wherever you get your podcast. 2 Drink Maximum is the name of the show. You can find us on Instagram at 2 Drink Maximum, which is TWODRINKMIXIMUM. I always struggle through that one.
He did it right
this
time.
It's such a long credit for us. But thank you so much for listening today. We'd also like to thank our sponsor, the Newsrooms. And yeah, thanks for coming along and all this amazing writing advice today, Joe.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see everybody next time.
Like Elvis, thank you very much.
There you go.
All
Perfect.
right.
That should be our new sign off. But for now, we'll catch you guys next time. Cheers.
Cheers.